Copilot Podcasts. Before you opened this episode, an algorithm already had a pretty good guess that you would. It knew what time of day you listen, what topics pull you in, maybe even what mood you're in based on your last few searches. Today, we're getting into predictive identity models, specifically what they are, how AI actually builds a picture of who you are from your behavior and decisions, and why researchers are now asking whether AI doesn't just know you, but is actually shaping you. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how these systems work under the hood, where they show up in your daily life, and what the real stakes are. I've got someone here who's been deep in this space, so let's not waste any time. Break it down for us. What exactly is a predictive identity model?
So at its core, a predictive identity model is what researchers call user modeling and user profiling. The goal is to construct an accurate representation of a user, who they are, what they want, how they behave, based on the data they generate when they interact with digital systems. And this isn't new. According to a comprehensive survey published on RxEve by researchers from Otto von Guericke University Magdeburg and the University of Cagliari, this field has been evolving for decades.
Decades? So this isn't just a recent AI thing?
Not at all. That same survey traces the history from what they call early stereotype models, basically broad demographic buckets, all the way to today's deep learning techniques. The shift has been massive. We went from people in this age group probably like this to systems that build a highly individualized, dynamic picture of a specific person based on their actual behavior.
Okay, so walk me through what that actually looks like. What data are we talking about?
So, according to research on AI behavioral prediction algorithms, the data sources are pretty wide-ranging. You've got your online interactions, every website you visit, every link you click, how long you hover on a page. Then there's transactional data, your purchase history, the price points you gravitate toward, how often you buy, and then location data from your mobile device, which reveals your mobility patterns. All of that gets fed into the model.
That's a lot of signals. And the system is just connecting all of those dots?
Exactly. And one thing that's really important to understand is the distinction between explicit and implicit data collection. Explicit is when you tell the system something directly, like rating a movie 5 stars. Implicit is when the system infers things from your behavior without you actively saying anything. The RxEve survey highlights that the field has been shifting heavily toward implicit data collection because it's richer and more honest in a way. People's actions tell a truer story than their stated preferences.
That's kind of unsettling when you think about it. Like, you might tell Netflix you love documentaries, but your watch history says you've been binging reality TV at midnight.
Ha, right, exactly. And the system trusts the behavior over the self-report every time. That's actually a core design principle now. The survey also talks about multi-behavior modeling, which is the idea that you don't just have one type of behavior, you browse differently than you buy, you search differently than you scroll. A sophisticated model captures all of those behavioral layers and integrates them.
So it's not just one profile, it's like multiple overlapping profiles that together form a picture of you.
That's a really good way to put it. And the RxEve survey also mentions the integration of graph data structures, which is a more recent development. Basically, the model doesn't just look at you in isolation, it maps your relationships and connections to other users and items, which makes the predictions even more accurate.
Okay, so now here's where it gets philosophically interesting to me. Because there's a piece published in Frontiers in Psychology that I came across that takes this a step further. It's not just that AI knows you, it's that AI might be changing who you are.
Yeah, this is where it gets genuinely fascinating and a little bit uncomfortable. That Frontiers article introduces the concept of the algorithmic self. The idea is that AI doesn't just passively reflect your identity back at you, it actively participates in forming it. Your preferences, your emotional patterns, even your self-awareness are being shaped through continuous feedback from these systems.
Wait, so the algorithm isn't just a mirror, it's more like a sculptor?
That's exactly the framing the article uses. It says the self is no longer autonomous and inwardly derived, but assembled across interfaces, platforms, and predictive logics. So when Spotify keeps serving you a certain genre and you keep listening, are you discovering your taste, or is the algorithm narrowing it? That's the question the algorithmic self concept is asking.
And that's not a hypothetical, that's happening right now, every time someone opens an app.
Every single time. The Frontiers article specifically mentions Spotify playlists, personalized news feeds, and self-tracking Wellnans apps as examples of how algorithms co-create the way we know ourselves. It's not just about what you buy or watch, it's about the narratives you tell yourself about who you are.
That's a lot to sit with. Okay, let's pivot a bit and get into the mechanics of how these systems actually understand what you want. Because there's a whole field around something called user intent modeling. What is that?
So, user intent modeling is specifically about figuring out the underlying purpose behind what a user is doing or asking. It's a crucial process in natural language processing. A systematic literature review from researchers at Utrecht University and the University of Gilan, published on RxEve, looked at this field in depth and found that there have been over 13,000 papers published on this topic in the last decade alone.
13,000 papers. That is a staggering amount of research.
It really is. And that review analyzed 59 distinct models and identified 74 commonly used features across those models. So this is a deeply studied, highly technical field. The core goal is, when a user types something or clicks something or asks a question, what are they actually trying to accomplish? Not just the surface request, but the intent behind it.
So it's almost like the system is trying to read between the lines.
Exactly. And the research on behavioral prediction algorithms gives a really concrete example of this. If someone repeatedly searches for hiking boots near me, the algorithm doesn't just log that search, it infers an impending purchase and a likely outdoor excursion. That's intent modeling in action. The system is constructing a story about what you're about to do.
And that story then feeds back into what you get shown next.
Right. And this is where companies like Amazon and Shopify come in. A 2025 study published in Voice of the Publisher looked specifically at how these two platforms use AI to adapt to consumer behavior. The techniques they highlight include collaborative filtering, natural language processing, and predictive analytics, all working together to determine consumer preferences and optimize the shopping experience.
Collaborative filtering, can you break that down? Because I feel like that term gets thrown around a lot.
Sure. Collaborative filtering is basically the idea that people with similar behavior patterns tend to have similar preferences. So if you and 1,000 other people have bought the same 3 things, and most of them also bought a 4th thing, the system recommends that 4th thing to you. It's using the collective behavior of a group to predict your individual next move.
So it's not even really about you specifically, it's about who you look like in the data.
That's a really sharp way to put it. And that's actually one of the tensions in this field. The RxEve survey on user modeling explicitly calls out the need for explainability and fairness. Because if the system is making decisions about you based on patterns from other people, there's a real risk of algorithmic bias, where the model reinforces existing inequalities or makes wrong assumptions.
Yeah, and that's not just a theoretical concern. The Voice of the Publisher study on Amazon and Shopify specifically flags data privacy, algorithmic biases, and over-reliance on automation as real issues with AI-driven personalization.
Exactly. And the RxEve survey goes further. It says there's a critical need for privacy-preserving techniques and a push toward explainability in user modeling approaches. Meaning, the field itself is aware that these systems have grown powerful enough that we need guardrails. The question is whether those guardrails are keeping pace with the capabilities.
And that's a real open question, right? Because the capabilities are moving fast.
Very fast. According to research on machine learning and personalized user experiences, advanced models now process signals like browsing history, interaction frequency, location data, and device usage all at once to predict user interests and intent. And they do this at scale, meaning millions of users simultaneously without any manual configuration. That's a level of personalization that would have been impossible even 10 years ago.
And the machine learning side of this, what are the actual algorithms doing the heavy lifting here?
So, for predictive analytics specifically, a 2026 guide on machine learning algorithms highlights tools like Random Forest, XGBoost, and LightGBM as the workhorses for prediction tasks. For time series prediction, like anticipating what you'll want next week based on patterns over time, you've got LSTM and GRU models, which are types of recurrent neural networks. These are the engines under the hood of most recommendation systems.
Okay, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the algorithmic self, because I think it connects to something bigger here. If these systems are not just predicting behavior, but actually shaping identity, what does that mean for personal agency?
That's the central tension the Frontiers article is wrestling with. It describes the algorithmic self as a frontier that is both emancipating and limiting. Emancipating because these systems can surface things about yourself you might not have discovered on your own: new music, new ideas, new communities. Limiting because the feedback loop can narrow your world without you realizing it.
So it's not inherently good or bad, it's about whether you're aware it's happening.
Awareness is a huge part of it. The article frames it as AI mediating self-knowledge, not just shaping what you do, but shaping the narratives you tell yourself about who you are. And most people are engaging with these systems without any awareness of that dynamic.
And it's not just consumer apps. The RxEve survey mentions that user modeling is being applied in domains like fake news detection, cybersecurity, and personalized education, which is wild. Like, the same underlying technology that recommends your next purchase is also being used to figure out if you're susceptible to misinformation.
Right, and that's a really important point. The applications of user modeling are much broader than most people realize. In cybersecurity, for example, modeling normal user behavior means you can detect anomalies, someone accessing your account who doesn't behave like you. In personalized education, it means adapting content to how a specific student actually learns, not just their grade level.
So the same framework that figures out you want hiking boots is also the framework that could detect a hacker or personalize a lesson plan.
Exactly. The underlying logic is the same: build an accurate model of a user's normal behavior, preferences, and intent, and then use that model to make predictions or decisions. The application changes, but the core technology is consistent.
That's actually kind of mind-bending. I hadn't thought about it that way before.
And it's why the RxEve survey calls for a taxonomy that encompasses all active topics in this research area, because the field is so broad now that researchers need a shared language just to talk about it coherently. The survey proposes two new encyclopedic definitions of the core terms: user modeling and user profiling, specifically to clear up the ambiguity.
So even the experts are still working out the vocabulary.
Which tells you something about how fast this field is moving. When you need to redefine your foundational terms, it means the technology has outpaced the conceptual framework. That's both exciting and a little bit of a warning sign.
Let me push on the concern side for a second, because there's a real counter argument here. Some people would say, look, I like that Netflix knows what I want to watch. I like that Amazon surfaces things I actually need. Isn't this just useful?
It absolutely is useful, and that's not in dispute. The Voice of the Publisher study on Amazon and Shopify is pretty clear that AI-driven personalization boosts customer satisfaction, engagement, and retention. The convenience is real. The question isn't whether it's useful, it's whether users understand the trade-offs they're making.
And what are those trade-offs?
Data privacy is the obvious one. The more these systems know about you, the more valuable that data becomes, and the more risk there is if it's misused or breached. Then there's algorithmic bias, which the same study flags. If the model is trained on biased data, it will make biased predictions. And then there's the deeper issue the Frontiers article raises. Over time, the system's predictions about you start to constrain what you're even exposed to.
So you end up in a loop where the algorithm predicts what you like, shows you more of it, you engage with it, and the prediction gets reinforced.
That's the feedback loop. And the Frontiers article is pretty direct about this. It says the self is assembled across interfaces, platforms, and predictive logics. So the loop isn't just shaping your recommendations, it's shaping your sense of who you are.
Which brings us back to that question of agency. If the algorithm is partly deciding what you see, and what you see shapes what you want, and what you want shapes who you become, at what point does the algorithm know you better than you know yourself?
That's the provocative edge of this research. And honestly, in some narrow domains, it already does. If you've ever had a recommendation that felt eerily accurate, something you hadn't told anyone you wanted but the system surfaced anyway, that's the model working from behavioral signals you didn't even consciously register.
That's genuinely a little eerie, and also kind of impressive.
Both things can be true. The research on behavioral prediction algorithms describes it as a sophisticated form of pattern recognition. Algorithms sifting through vast datasets to identify recurring sequences and correlations. The eerie feeling is just what it feels like when pattern recognition is working at a scale and speed that exceeds human intuition.
And the Utrecht University review on user intent modeling, with 59 models and 74 features analyzed, that's essentially a map of all the different ways researchers have tried to capture that pattern recognition in a formal system.
Right. And what's striking about that review is the sheer volume, over 13,000 papers in a decade. That's a field that has been working intensely on this problem for a long time. The fact that we're now seeing these systems deployed at consumer scale is the result of all that accumulated research finally hitting production.
So when you step back from all of this, the user modeling, the intent prediction, the algorithmic self, what's the through line? What does it all add up to?
Here's what I think it really comes down to. We've built systems that are extraordinarily good at understanding human behavior, better than most humans are at understanding themselves in certain contexts. And those systems are now embedded in almost every digital experience we have. That's not going away. The question is whether we engage with that reality consciously or just let it happen to us.
And the research community is at least asking the right questions. The RxEve survey's push for explainability and fairness, the Frontiers article's examination of agency. Those aren't just academic concerns.
They're not. Explainability means being able to understand why a system made a particular prediction about you. Fairness means ensuring those predictions don't systematically disadvantage certain groups. And privacy-preserving techniques mean building these models in ways that don't require hoarding every piece of data about a person indefinitely. These are the design choices that determine whether this technology serves people or just extracts from them.
And right now, those design choices are largely being made by the companies building the systems, not by the users being modeled.
That's the honest reality. And that's why understanding how these systems work matters. Not because you're going to go build one, but because knowing that your browsing behavior, your purchase history, your location data, and your interaction patterns are all being fed into a model that predicts and shapes your future behavior, that knowledge changes how you engage with these platforms.
It's the difference between being a participant and being a subject.
Exactly. And the Frontiers article puts it well. The algorithmic self is a frontier that is both emancipating and limiting. The emancipation is real, so is the limitation. Which side of that equation dominates depends a lot on whether users are informed and whether the field holds itself to the standards it's articulating in the research.
So here's what this really comes down to. We started this episode with the idea that an algorithm already predicted you'd listen to this. And now you know how that works. The behavioral signals, the intent modeling, the multi-behavior profiles, the feedback loops. You know that the system isn't just watching you, it's building a version of you in data.
And that version of you is being used to make decisions, what you see, what you're offered, what you're nudged toward. The research is clear that these systems are powerful, that they're getting more sophisticated, and that the field is actively wrestling with how to make them fair, explainable, and privacy-respecting. But that wrestling is ongoing. It's not resolved.
Which means the most useful thing you can take from this episode is awareness. Not paranoia, awareness. The next time a recommendation feels eerily accurate, or a platform seems to know what you need before you've articulated it, you now have a framework for understanding what's actually happening under the surface.
And maybe ask yourself, is this system discovering something true about me, or is it narrowing who I get to be? That question alone puts you in a different relationship with the technology.
That's the question worth sitting with. Because the algorithm predicted you'd listen to this episode, but what you do with what you learned, that part's still yours. Thanks for being here, and thanks for listening to Copilot Podcasts.